Hello, my name's Host Eric, host talking to famous people. I'm here with Low to the Renzo, the Renzrada, the swaggest, dankest swag tank in Swagtown, Low Renz Walker, and also present in the room, the critic who brings the criticism with his critical stick and beats everybody about the head with it, Eric's biggest critic, famous person, Barry, on the camera no less. So, when I said at the outset I'd like to talk about kindness and consistency, I did so because earlier in the day I received a comment that accused me of saying unkind things. And in that video, I drew a distinction between saying unkind things and saying critical things about an abstraction or an institution. That you can't be unkind to somebody unless you're directing your unkind words towards them. So specifically, I can't be unkind to any given Muslim by being by directing negative, harsh words at the religion of Islam. Just like you can't say something unkind to me by saying I, people, men, white 45-year-old men with beards are awful people because it's not directed at me at the end of the day. You do include me in the group, and I would be right and righteous and just to critique your group, your tendency towards group designation and your description of that group. But I would not be correct to say that you said something unkind to me. Something unkind to me is a different matter entirely. It's saying something like, "Oh, Eric, you're so fat. Oh, Eric, you're so ugly. Oh, you're so You're so crazy." Or like, you know, the to say, "I can't believe that video you posted the other day, Eric. That was awful." I mean, I'm not saying it was like notably bad. It was just so boring and just you're so pointless. I wish you just quit. If you say something like that, that would be unkind, right? Because it's not really motivated by trying to give me useful feedback. I don't mind useful feedback at all. I like it, but that would just be designed to try to make me feel bad, probably. So intentionality comes into play as well, quite a bit. I understand that some viewers, I'm sure plenty of non-Muslim viewers, find some of my stronger anti-Muslim language perhaps off-putting, or even find themselves instinctually, reflexively, and thoroughly disagreeing with the strategy and the idea of doing that. And I want to say that I think that your disagreement regarding that is a totally viable position. I'm not saying anybody should watch those videos. I am saying, however, that what the word I affirm the words I say in those videos. That's why I'm reaffirming them now. I affirm those words. At the end of that process, I did not feel, in retrospect, after I thought about it and looked at the comments and stuff, like I had done something regrettable. Like I had acted on impulse, and like I sometimes do. If I bust some commenters' chops, I feel bad because a lot of times I'll think I was being unkind, maybe, right? If I bust someone's chops who's commenting about, I don't know, whatever. But in this instance, I didn't feel that way at all. And I'm going to pause here and see if either my biggest critic or my thickest rib pretender, Lorenz Walker, has any thoughts on this. Do you think the distinction between kindness and something else made upon the notion of it being directed at an individual is correct? Or do you think I can be unkind to somebody by saying negative words about something they hold dear?
um, well, I think it's because kindness is more relative. So I don't know. Because you should be able to be critical to things that people might not appreciate hearing. I don't know. I don't know anything about consistency or kindness, really.
Barry, you got any thoughts? Well, we'll wait and see if Barry has any thoughts. Uh, I'll go on to the consistency part. So, for me, one of the arguments I made in response to Crescent Shamrock, who was appalled by my behavior, um, was to point out that I can't show a Muslim any respect at all if I'm engaged in some sort of special Muslim coddling ritual because I assume they can't take it, right? That's not being respectful to Islam or being respectful to any individual Muslim, which is the only thing I care about. I don't care about being respectful to Islam. I do care about being respectful to other individual human beings, and I have a pretty clear definition of what respectful means. It's not it's not agreeing with you. It's not going along with your social mores. It's assuming and treating you as though you're an equal and capable participant in a discursive world that involves us recognizing the legitimacy of paradigms that we don't like. So, to me, then, in the instance with the Islam thing, it's pretty straightforward. I have to be consistent. I'm not going to start lying and holding back what I actually think about shit just because some people say it's a particularly hot button topic or because some of my viewers, whom I really like and do respect, uh, like Widad and KG and stuff, that I know that they view it as me spitting in their face. They're like, Eric, we've come here, we've watched some of your videos, we've commented on stuff, we like you, we've been cool, we've been, you're an anti-Muslim person, but we're so open-minded. Even knowing that, we come here and we just sort of skip over your anti-Muslim stuff. But this is too far, Eric. You've crossed the pale here, and you're basically just spitting in our face, saying you're not welcome here. But I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that. You absolutely are welcome here, and I do respect you. And because I respect you, I expect you to understand intuitively and apply automatically the distinction between that which is words attacking an abstraction or an idea or an institution or something and words attacking another individual human being. They're very different. I've done both. I do both. In this instance, I didn't do the latter. I did the former. Understanding the distinction is hugely important then because there's nothing to be offended by, right? It's possible to offend me. You can offend me by invalidating the legitimacy of other human beings. It's easy enough to offend me. You say shit like, those people are stupid, the people don't count. Then that's a problem. I slipped up once in one of those videos and said Muslims instead of Islam. It's easy to conflate the two. It's what makes that kind of rhetoric risky, right? It's risky rhetoric to start calling out Islam and saying, these people are these people are awful and these people do this and that and blah 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 blah, and to say things like I did in that video and saying, well, if you can't recognize this and you aren't even really fully human, those are the sort of talks that lead to genocides, right? It's fair critique. Absolutely, it's a fair critique. However, as a general rule, I'm extremely careful with what I say, and I'm not actually advocating at any point for any violence against anybody. In fact, I don't think I've ever advocated a violent course of action. I've advocated things like, let's sell a bunch of guns to the Middle East and not sell them any guns, not sell them any ships or planes. I've not advocated the U.S. should bomb the Middle East. I've advocated we should do the exact opposite. So the thing is, it's important that when I say it's desensitizing to do that stuff, I mean it. It's like everyone gets offended by whatever offends them more at first and decreasingly so as they realize it's not that big of a deal. Okay, all right. I mean, the reason that there's a divide between the Muslim world and the thinking that I'm presenting is because the Muslim world is so homogenous. Muslim countries are not places that encourage and uphold a fair system that allows people of divergent beliefs to operate concurrently and successfully all voice their opinions without any of them being persecuted. So, as a consequence, they're not familiar with encountering divergent ideas like that, and they don't yet know what to do with them. The more we encounter them, especially by somebody like me who's, I hope, able to explain why he's doing it, right? It's not just because I fucking hate Muslims and I want to make them mad. That's not true, and it's not why I'm doing it. Now, it is true that I am extremely infuriated by any suggestion that somebody's religious sensitivities ought to be prioritized over freedom of expression. And it is true that the Muslim world likes to make the argument that says these things are equivalent, that your value of freedom of expression is no different than our value of the sacred. But of course, that's abjectly, openly false because, one can be applied both directions and one can't. So I can say, well, I'm for free expression, meaning I'm for all of your Muslim expression and all of my anti-Muslim expression. You say, well, we're for the sacred, which means you're for all of your Muslim expression and you're against all my anti-Muslim expression. So you see how one's inclusive and works both ways and one doesn't? That's why I have to do that. Because, unfortunately, I encounter these examples of large populations of people who have had their brains fucked with, basically. Like the Chinese nationals. I had this problem with China as well. Chinese nationals come on here and start running their mouth like they know something. But the fact is, what they know is that they're brainwashed into thinking their government they can't possibly ever say anything bad about their government or their own country doing shit. It's wrong, and they gotta get called out on it. So the thing is all that shit I'm doing unkind? I don't view it as unkind. I view it as liberative. And I do understand that it gets really harsh sometimes. I get really harsh sometimes. I do feel guilty sometimes when I get too harsh. I do feel guilty when I think I busted an individual's chops too much rather than a system. I feel concerned about number 8. I'm worried about his. I don't want to make him unhappy, right? I don't want him to feel as though he's been reduced or dismissed by my language. 'Cause I do respect what he's doing, but he's persisting in some bad habits that keep making me want to smack him down. I don't know what to say. I mean, and when I want to do that, I tend to do that. And when I do that, I'd like to think I do a pretty effective job of it. He's not winning any of these battles. Let's put it that way. So I feel bad because it's like, I really want to, it's the whole cool hand Luke thing. Sometimes nothing's a real cool hand because if you keep getting up, eventually I'm not going to want to punch you anymore. I don't care if you fall down every time I punch you. It doesn't make me want to punch you more. Aha, I'm winning. It makes me want to punch you less. Like, Jesus Christ. No.
Why do you view it as smacking down? I keep hearing you use that phrase as in you've got the choice either to smack down or to not smack down.
I refer to that as because most comment exchanges between me and everybody else are non-combative in nature, which means disagreement is voiced a certain way or expressed a certain way. And there's a whole set of little language keys you can stick in any comment to indicate what I am doing now in this comment is I am positioning myself as the knowledgeable one, passing judgment on you and indicating to you where you're right and where you're wrong. When people do that, it's sort of like you might call metaphysical anthropology. Like, I'm the anthropologist and you're the native, and I'll explain to you what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it wrong, right? So I know that attack method well. I don't use it. I don't initiate it much. Almost never anymore. I used to, but I know it well. When it's used on me, I'm not sure why. I don't really think about it, but they're already, I put a stop to that shit before I even think about it. When I say smack down, it's because That's exactly what it is. They've raised the sword up, right?
Yeah, but I personally, from experience, from past experience, when I see what someone has said and they're making a claim or they're making a disagreement, I don't think in any way that it's effective to act as if a sword has been risen. I try to avoid that idea altogether by analyzing what they have said, asking them to clarify on what I see as a fallacy or something that's inconsistent in their argument, and then make it so that they have to argue against themselves. Basically, sort of saying that we're not going to have a fight here. We're going to get to the point together. Like we're going to try and get to some consistent truth that we can both agree upon.
That's a good strategy if the truths are permutable. Okay, that's the key thing. If you can perm it and say let's perm do both, then that'll work. If you can perm it and say the same thing, you can perm it and say like, okay, well, I'm willing to accept the claims you're making because they're not inconsistent necessarily with other claims, then that's fine. But the thing is, at some point, to move that person in the direction you're talking about moving them in, you're going to either have to point out an inconsistency, which is smacking them down, or you're going to have to dispute a claim. You can't avoid that.
Like usually, usually I just ask a lot of questions. Basically, I say, well, reading this, it sounds like you're making this claim. This could mean this. I mean, I'm basically writing down a synopsis of what I thought their point was, and then getting them to further clarify their point, so therefore avoiding any sort of notion that you've got sort of a smackdown going.
But see, that was his point. That was his point. His point was whatever his words were and he said and his actual points that he made are irrelevant. His point was, I'm asserting dominance. That's why the only possible response is, pow.
Yeah. Well, I actually sent quite a lot of messages to number 8 a while ago, based on the nature of his comments and the basic dispute that. Well, I was answer some questions that he raised in what he wrote, and then after that, I tried to make him understand what the implications of what he's saying, because it came across quite egotistical, kind of. He was wearing his ego on his sleeve. He seemed to always refer back to something that he'd realized beforehand or something. And basically I was saying, what's your point? Like,
are you the one who pointed out, are you the one who wrote the comment that said, like, usually when people are doing this, it's not ego, it's actually low self-esteem? Are you the one who wrote that comment? Or was that somebody else?
No, probably. I don't think so.
Okay. I remember some of your comments in that exchange as well. Your comments in that exchange were great, and I see what you're saying. Your approach is not, I'm not disputing the wisdom and value of your approach. I'm just saying, I think I'm fighting that battle on a different plane. I'm fighting it on a social domination plane, not so much an idea plane. Like,
I'm trying to point out to him that, like, what the implications of what he's saying to get him to agree or not, basically. I can't really explain it. I'm not doing a good job right now, but the way that I go about a situation where I want to where I want to be right or where I want to invalidate someone else, is I'm very careful not to make it look like it's an insult to their intellect or their point in general. I want to show them that I want to understand what they mean. So normally I write down sort of a paragraph of what I thought they said and blah, blah, blah. And so I kind of analyze the point first so that we can actually get to the point quicker. Although what I'm saying now is pretty incoherent. But.
Well, I mean, I like the idea in general. I think I have a habit of letting them lead the dance, right? One area in which I'm strangely vulnerable is it can be, if you know how to push them in the right order, it can be kind of easy to push my buttons and to get a response out of me, you know? So in that instance, I think he's pushing the right buttons. He's rolling in with that character, that mildly exacerbated by your slowness, pedantic bringer of corrector of
Yeah.
wrongness. But the thing is that character is a character I know very well. I've been that character. I still am that character sometimes. And if you're gonna do it at all, it's not a character you play loosely, right? Because
Right.
you're saying I'm down to throw down. I'm coming into battle. So in that on that ground, I do feel bad sometimes. I go back and forth on number 8, right? I sort of feel bad, but then I walk through the logic of it and I think, the lesson to be learned here for him is, check that swagger unless you got the weapons to back it up.
Yeah.
You know?
Because whether or not he was actually being egotistical, whatever, negative things, maybe he was just doing it because it's effective, right? But he made that argument, well, it got you talking, didn't it? But also what he didn't take into account, which I actually demonstrate, is that the majority of people will use cognitive dissonance or like mechanisms instead of like I did. I spent quite like half an hour maybe analyzing what he was saying, and so I could get to the point where I was like, well, maybe he's just doing it because it's effective. But the thing is, realistically, most people will look at a point, they see the consistent tones of this guy's being negative, this guy has no point, I'm confused, and they just discount you. And he kept mentioning that people like never listen to him and all that, and I was saying, well, that's because consistently throughout what you've been writing, you're highlighting tones of just negativity and discounting people's opinions and things like that, and he never addressed that. He just kept arguing. So that's where it ended.
Yeah, I wouldn't address that is a problem in life when the thing that actually matters, the point that actually matters, that ought to be the thing that provides real growth or at least revelation regarding the truth or something,
Yeah.
that just gets dodged. To me, see, like that shit pisses me off, right? You said, okay, well, I'm done talking to you now. To me, that earns another 4 hours of ranting videos because it's like I just can't tolerate it when people don't respond to my points and then continue to make their own points, even though I've
Well,
answered
what
them.
I did for me, what's the word? I felt good enough leaving it there because what I had done was effectively, if anyone asked what my analyses would I basically demonstrated my point. I've demonstrated that he wasn't addressing my point and that his point is worthless, basically. I've done that, and he never addressed it, so that was my point, to demonstrate that he's not arguing in an effective manner, and one that doesn't make people think that he's talking nonsense. And he never addressed it, so that I didn't have to go any further. That was it. You know.
So to you, does it genuinely not matter that
What he
who?
was saying was worthless because it never
No,
made any.
no, that's not what I was going to ask. Does it genuinely not matter that you don't get that moment where you can see the defeat in his eyes and know that you have won?
Well, I saw the defeat. He didn't come up with anything. He didn't answer any. I can't remember all the things I said, but he never actually made a point that discounted mine, the ones that I was mentioning. So to me, if you go back over it, you'll see that. And if you look at it in my viewpoint, I've won, although that wasn't the point. I was trying to realize what his point was. And so to me, I know that he had no point because he couldn't answer any of the questions. I was giving him a framework to explain himself, but he didn't utilize that framework. So
Right. Well, he's penned himself into this I have all the answers and the truth within me thing, you know?
yeah, so he doesn't explain. What if you have all the truth and you have these great insights? Why don't you go ahead and try and explain them to try and get some confirmation, some feedback, some anything? Why just say people are wrong and leave it there? Why do that? I mean, what's the point? It was a waste of time.
It's because he's trying to establish dominance. And that's why, to me, I always frame it in a win loss situation because at least then, because the nice thing about a win-loss framework is this: once a point has been hammered and officially won or lost, it's genuinely put to bed. But you got to get them to acknowledge it, or else it won't get put to bed. You know. And I'm not saying you should have. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm just saying that that's one advantage of the win-loss framing of things. I understand there are lots of advantages to an additive sum approach as well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not critiquing that. But I will say that people will persist in their wrongness a lot of times until and unless you pin them down and make them say, okay, fine, I'm wrong. I don't know why,
but to me, the fact that he didn't give anything, I just want everyone else and myself to know that there's no content there. That what he was saying is that he was saying that you were wrong and things like this. Well, he never actually gave an argument. I gave him a framework to provide an argument, but he didn't. So.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I agree. All the judges in the round, if we had any decent debate judges there, they adjudicated that in no uncertain terms, one way or the other, right? Yeah. And so on that level, you definitely won. There's no disputing that. What I'm saying is not that I like to win. I'm saying I like to see the defeat in their eyes, and which means and I can't see it if they're running away from me. So
well, I thought in this instance that the methodology I usually utilize would be the most effective, because he seemed like he was fairly intelligent, so he could have. If you went out about it just from an attack standpoint, he would just keep bringing up points. So I tried to provide a framework by which he would have to answer all the questions, and he didn't. So I wasn't trying to argue with any of his points, because to be honest, I didn't really understand the subject that much myself. The NI, he was talking about like what NI is and your lackluster description of it. Mine was just to get him to acknowledge that he comes across a bit egotistical and all that, and also to demonstrate that he and why it is, and that he had no content. So I achieved that.
You did. Yeah, I agree. Well, you're INTP?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't remember that. It's just my conclusion from the talking we've just had right now is that you must be INTP, because you talk like an NTP. You know, you've got that whole NTP analysis of the situation as well, and you've got the INTP approach, which is why INTPs roll their eyes at ENTPs, because ENTPs are insistent on doing something that is not the most logical way to do it, and it's not the most efficient way to do it. It's not the most effective way to do it, but it indulges the ENTPs. Yeah.
Well, it's a lot quicker. It's like you can go on to you have so many videos each day. I couldn't do that because I would spend more time sort of refining one idea, one perspective. And if you look at the comments on the YouTube, it's illustrated there, because I wrote so much just about what he was writing and things like that, and basically analysis TI, which is the disadvantage to heavy users in NE basically.
Say again. I missed one word. You the TI. The TI.
That basically what I was saying is that I do roll. I think TI users roll their eyes at NE or secondary TI because they don't actually fully analyze a point. They don't sequentially and logically go about doing things, but that has a massive disadvantage compared to the scope that you can have. You can go over several things, though they're not as refined as much, and the point isn't as clear.
Right. And there are certain conclusions also that ENTPs draw that we can do an awfully good job of explaining why they're logically sound, but we know deep down that really the reason is I just got a feeling about this. All right, so just go with it. But we're really good at explaining things logically, so you'll never hear ENTPs say those words. They'll always give you some complicated explanation about why you should go with this idea, but really the reason is I got a feeling about it.
Like if you ask a question to an INTP, you'll often see them sort of stuttering a lot, trying to choose words. basically not. They're not. Their flow is not seamless as an ENTP's. But the way I see it is that an ENTP will just come up with. They won't have a sequential explanation. They'll kind of go off and be like, well, that's because of this, and then that's this, and then the aggregate will get to the point, but they won't specifically go from here to there. They won't specifically explain a point. Sorry, they won't directly get to a point. They'll go kind of like around it and then across.
They'll try to make it. They'll try to make it so that you don't realize that there are gaps in the chain.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's it.
We're trying to sort of muddy the water so you can't tell that they're. Wait a second. Okay, I got this part, and then suddenly we're over here. What happens in between? Well, we'll figure that out when we get there.
Yeah, that's it. But with a TI user, if they're good at communicating, they'll take a long time. It'll seem slow, but it's very easy to follow their point. You can kind of see how it's grown, and to be honest, they might actually, even though they say less words and they speak less, they might actually get to the point quicker, or it might be easier to analyze it. So.
I think INTPs in general are better debaters than ENTPs once they're at that close to the top level, because they start off a lot weaker, not because they're actually weaker, but because they don't like to take a lot of risks and display until they know they're going to display well. And that holds them back for a while. But my best debaters are INTPs, except I have one really strong ENTP, and I've got one really strong, I think she's an ESFP maybe, but the thing is she's a really strong debater, but she's in the first speaker role, not responsible for any of the strategy stuff, right? So she looks to Edmund. Okay, what responses am I giving in this speech? And she's mastered the doing part of it, right? And she's a good thinker and everything too. But the ENTP in that pairing does all the strategizing. The INTPs, I've got INTP Little Edmund. He's my very best middle school debater by a large margin. He's a fucking monster of epic proportions. And I've got probably my second best debater is Brandon, another INTP. And my best debater last year was Alice, another INTP.
Do you think the reason that might be is because think of TI as like a computer processing, right? This is a bad analogy, but if you download something, it takes you a certain amount of time to process it, right? Well, if you just start debating, if you hear someone say something, you haven't done previous processes on similar things. You've got to process that thing right there. So if you've got loads of NE and loads of ideas coming at you on a debate, you've got to process it. As you're an INTP who's done debate for a while, well, your TI, you've processed all the things. You might have heard that very point before, or similar type of framework, or similar type of thing, and so you already know very quickly how to respond. You don't have to process it.
The nice thing is, the great thing about teaching INTPs is they generalize out correctly. So they don't just generalize out everything and then apply rules that don't apply. Like, well, no, you can't use that burden in this context. It sounds similar, but no. I have those kind of problems all the time with kids in general. INTPs, I don't have that kind of problem. They'll get the concept, they'll generalize it out, and they won't generalize it out to the exceptions that are wrong to generalize it out to, because they intuitively get the logical relationships between the arguments. And I think what you're saying about having processed it and packaged it into those kind of compacted argumentary force cherry bombs, right? They're like, we're having compacted them into those, and then successfully generalized them out correctly. The ability curve goes like this.
Yeah, because it goes up because
it goes like that, and so they trick you. They're stealthy at first. You don't notice them, and then all of a sudden they're like, "When did you get all fucking beast?" It's cool. I like them. I like INTPs a lot. They're also kind of a pain in the ass. They realize early on that they can actually be honest with me, and so I have the most fightiest, contrarianest INTPs in history because they come into my class and they realize that I'm serious when I say things like, "Well, you should tell me to fuck off then if you don't like it," you know, and then they do. So it's like I got that going on too with them, but you know. They're INTPs. I'll let them, there's no point in trying to sway them because at the end of the day, the other thing is INTPs just don't give a fuck about like, well, fine, Strauss, you're gonna be all dickish about it. I'm bailing. INTP's got no problem with that. So I do try to pamper them, but I don't need to coddle them at all. Try to pamper them because I appreciate them genuinely. I need the warriors who have the you know. It's like I'm never going to be the guy who, when you go into the sword fighting class, that I'm going to be naturally good at that at all, right? If I were doing that, I'd want to get the kids with the biggest, buffest arms and the most dexterity and all that kind of shit, right? Well, I'm doing that metaphysically, so I got to get those kids the metaphysical version of that, right? That's what INTP is, and really that's it. INTP and ENTP. I will say, INTJs and ENTJs can become very, very good, but it takes them a lot longer than either ENTPs or INTPs. It takes them a couple of years, and never and always, never do they get over this. They're always vulnerable to something they haven't heard before. ENTJs and INTJs are always vulnerable to something out of left field. That's why ENTPs mop the floor with them in any kind of debate round, because who's the best of all types at coming up with this random shit that nobody in the room has ever thought of or heard of before, completely out of left field, that is bullshit, but that nobody can quite figure out how to say is bullshit in the time remaining, and that somehow wins the round. You know, it's like that's the one quality the ENTPs have above all other debaters is things coming out of nowhere. You know, if you can, but you can't rely on that every time, right? It just sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. You know.
In a debate, so you've got an ENTP and he makes loads of points on the subject that you're talking about. If say those points, if you had a TI user who thought about it for a few days, he comes back and says, "Well, that's actually incorrect." Imagine you have an ENTP going against an INTJ and an ENTJ. Well, they don't know if that point's valid or not, right? So, and if you make it sound like it is valid, then, and they don't understand the point, then they can't prove that it's not right. Can you win in a debate by making making it look like you've won and the other person has no argument, or does the person judging it actually go over points and see if they make any sense? Or have I got the whole format?
The way it works is like this. It's a turn-based game. Like, are you familiar with the old board game Othello?
No.
Okay. It's a game where there were like checker circles, kind of. One side's black, one side's white. And as you take over control of territory, you flip over all of them to your color. So like, I can control this territory, and I'm flipping over all of them to white. And then the other guy goes, okay, well now I've controlling this territory. So we flip them all these ones back over to black. Those ones stay white over there, you know. And then you go back and forth like that, trying to flip over more and more. And the more you have flipped over, the more leverage points you can execute to flip over things. So as it gets close to the end, it turns into like a avalanche to the end, right? Because it becomes mathematically impossible for you to sustain your weak position if you're losing, right? It works the same way in debate. So the thing is, you've got a framework, which is you have two competing frameworks in the round, and there are three possible outcomes. My framework might be whoever saves the most lives should win the round. Your framework might be whoever protects rights the most should win the round. And the three possible ways to interpret this framework battle are, yes, the judge prefers my framework, the judge prefers your framework, or the judge thinks framework's a wash, like doesn't, and then defaults to a default framework of basically a general cost benefit analysis. All right, so if the judge doesn't think either team won the framework battle, then he's going to default to a general cost-benefit analysis. Now, if one team does win the framework battle, so let's say you win the framework battle, that we should evaluate the round on rights, not on predicted lives saved. Then if I have proved successfully that my wave saves the most lives, but you've proved that your wave protects rights the best, then you'll win the round because you won framework, and the judge agrees with you at that point, then because you won that argument chain, that he should judge the round according to who has the biggest pile of rights impacts, and therefore the lives impacts won't matter, right? Because if they did matter, that would mean that he won the framework battle. Those two things can't. Yeah. All right. So then there's that. Now, as far as the argument chains go, it's like, let's say I start an argument that says this. We should apply the probable cause standard to students in schools instead of just sticking with the existing reasonable suspicion non-standardy thing that we got. We should apply probable cause is a better rights protector. And the reason is, my first argument is because in the status quo, reasonable suspicion allows too much violation of students' bodily integrity rights. That's the first argument in the chain. Now, what I've done there is I've established certain things. I've established one onto the flow. I've established, meaning that these are points that are sitting on the argument chain. So I've established that that in the argument, in the card that I've read, the evidence that I've read, that in fact students are having their bodily integrity rights violated. So there's an example of a strip search and some other bad search like that, you know. And so then I've also given you a reason why that the rights are violated. It's because reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion isn't a strict enough standard. That's my warrant, my reason why the impact of more rights violations is justified. All right, and then so those things are established on the flow. Now let's just pretend all we're doing in this round is arguing this one argument chain. So then in the next piece, the neg would say, well, that's not it doesn't matter if it's violating bodily integrity rights a little bit, because our rights framework doesn't apply the same to kids as it does to adults. That kids, in fact, have fewer rights. And then maybe I'd come back to the other side and say, well, that's a claim. I hear a claim, but no warrant. You said they have fewer rights, but you haven't warranted it at all. And so then the other person goes back and says, well, it's because they have limited capacity to consent. The ability to exercise rights is really an ability to consent, to be a fully consenting individual. And for the because of a lack of being fully informed primarily, kids cannot meaningfully consent to things, and that's why they have fewer rights. And so then I'd come back and say, this metric of capacity to consent to enjoy rights to be free from bodily integrity violations is an odd warrant indeed, Judge, because if you think about it, and if you actually listen to what he's saying that the reason you can violate my body is because I'm not capable of telling you I don't want you to do that. But I clearly am capable of telling you I don't want you to do that, because you have empowered not you, but the school system has empowered the school administrators to violate my body based simply on a reasonable suspicion. What I'm saying is I don't like that. I'm expressing to you that I don't consent to that, and you've not given me any reason why I am not capable of executing consent on that. You haven't shown me that I am, in fact, not fully informed enough to consent to this matter. I clearly am fully informed, since I'm making all these arguments in the debate round right now to you. I must be informed about them, right? So why then, you can't just say, I have fewer rights because I'm not capable of consent, and then say, it doesn't matter if I'm capable of consent in this instance, I still have fewer rights. So which is it? Am I incapable of consent and therefore do have fewer rights? Or am I actually capable of consent and your warrant is bullshit? That's
right.
And then you go down the next chain. And so it's like what the judge should be doing is tracking these argument chains the whole way through. Now, usually an argument will go off on. So it'll be like, okay, now you get those impacts. Oh, now you don't get those impacts. You get those impacts. Now you don't get those impacts. Sometimes it'll be turned. You get those impacts. No, I get those impacts. No, you get those impacts. No, I get those impacts. That's turned, right? Sometimes it'll be modified. So it'll be like, you used to have global nuclear war as an impact, but now it's just nuclear war in Mexico.
Who decides the framework that you choose? Because some frameworks um, might be better than
You,
others.
you choose whatever you want. The thing is, you have to be aware of the nature of rhetorical slopes. So if you choose an outrageous framework, you've got a much steeper hill to climb to convince everybody that this should fly. So if I say, we should judge this round on whoever says the word bird the most. Bird, 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 right? That's a tough hill to climb. That's a steep rhetorical slope. You've got to really come up with a lot of energy and argumentation force to sell the idea that that actually is why we should judge the round.
And you said that the judge might, if the framework's not good enough, the the thing that you chose. Can he literally just assume that your framework's not good enough, or does he have to hear your argument chains and such first?
I'm sorry I missed the first part of that, but I think you're saying if I make a bullshit framework argument like that, can the judge just dismiss it out of hand?
Yeah.
They're not supposed to. I mean, judges have some debate events that are more like policy. The judges have to submit their paradigms, and it's a system where the debaters all say how much they like each judge, and this is a top level circuit debate where you get a lot of the same judges because only a few people. There aren't very many people qualified to judge a policy debate. So it's like my paradigm just says blank slate, which is how everyone's paradigm should be. It means I assume I go in pretending I know nothing except what I need to know to understand what you mean. All right. So if you make the argument that we should do that and you warrant it, you do have to warrant it. You have to provide a reason for me. If it's unwarranted, I won't count the impacts. If you just make a claim and then it's just claiming some impacts, like because if we do your thing, it's going to kill 50 million people, but you don't provide any reason why or how, I won't count those impacts. But if you do warrant it, even if it's a crazy warrant, if it's a legitimate warrant, that is to say, it's not like there's some sort of causal link established. Not like, well, we should blow up China because I don't like their shoes. It's we should blow up China because current shoe production in China is causing an economic collapse in Kansas, which will spread outward and lead to global nuclear war. Then fine, if you make that ridiculous argument, no problem. You got global nuclear war and your impacts now. Of course, the more ridiculous the argument is, the less your opponent has to say for me to cross off the flow. So if it's a ridiculous argument, if it's ridiculous enough, because if we do that, the moon will fall on my head. All your opponent has to say is, that's ridiculous. To me, if I'm the judge, right? Because it's completely ridiculous, and it's all the opponent needs to say, and it's obviously true to me, so I'm going to just accept that as a rebuttal. The extent to which the ridiculous argument is warranted well requires then the opponent to answer it more well, and if they do, I will knock it down. It's not standing at that point. Okay, it was standing. He had global nuclear war. He gave a good rebuttal. He said, actually, I have two answers to why the link between shoes and global nuclear war is not accurate. The first is a systems analysis answer, and it talks about how these single factors. The second is that if that were the case, it would already have happened because the shoe thing has been persisting for the last 20 years and nothing's happened that indicates that it would be the case, right? So like there's two different wars. So now it's knocked down twice. So let's say in the next speech, the other guy comes back and says, nuh-uh, that 20-year thing's false, but doesn't answer my other dispute, but doesn't answer my systems answer, it's still knocked down, okay? Because
Yeah.
and it's still knocked down even if no debater references that argument chain again in the round. But I always tell my debaters, and good debaters always do this, they have to walk the judge through the flow. So in the speech, the debater should say something like, Judge, in response to my opponent's first contention, I provided two rebuttals. He answered the second rebuttal, and I've attempted to answer that rebuttal in the summary speech. However, he dropped the first rebuttal, and therefore it stands. Because that rebuttal stands, his impacts are not standing. It doesn't matter what you think about that other rebuttal. So cross that off the flow, Judge. Now let's go on to the next thing. That's what good debaters do, is they walk the judge through the judging process, basically.
It's quite a very complicated process, actually, of how it's all set up, but it makes sense.
Yeah,
That's pretty awesome.
It's
I wish I did.
fun, dude. It's super fun. You could do it for sure. Look, I tell INTPs and ENTPs this. This is the only people I ever say this to. I don't care if you have any debate experience or not. You can coach debate. I hired Zachary. He had not done one speck of debate shit, and he came up with brilliant case strategy for me for nationals. Now, granted, it turned out to be possibly a little too dense, but it got less dense as it played out as we tweaked it. Massaged it into a more
Right.
what
Dense.
economy of language. Kimball, my former INTP business partner, who was state champion policy debate back when I debated back in the late '80s, uh, and she and I had some throwdowns. Oh my God, anybody watching Kimball and I hang out for like I don't know an hour or two would conclude either that we were in love or that we wanted to kill each other, neither of which was really necessarily true, but we had very passionate arguments, right? And they were always about public policy shit. They weren't like, you didn't bring me a cup of coffee? Why not? It was all like, how can you possibly think that you should blah 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 blah? Campbell is fucking crazy. And then she's just like, but she's an experienced policy bishop, state champion, right? So she could hang with me 100% of the time. And she debated like water. It was so fucking difficult to pin that woman down. Drove me crazy. Uh, but, I could hold my own too. So, anyway. I liked Kimball a lot.
The, I don't have enough to really talk about this, but won't the ultimate solution to public policy come from systems analysis and systems thinking? Where you can, because the systems, if you think about, the way I think about it is the way the world, well, everyone's competing against one another, there's inefficiencies everywhere. And there must be a more optimal system in which like everyone would be happier and there would be more everything would be more functional, more research would be dedicated and things, and there would be an equation that we'd all be, the goal for in one country becomes specified in this. And what I'm saying is, don't you think that that the ultimate solution would come from everyone kind of analyzing the system and redesigning the system in which the world comes from? Probably impossible though for that to actually happen.
I think the way it needs to be is like the internet. So we've got to take public policy issues and break them into segments of public policy issues and make an app for that. So instead of thinking about homelessness as a problem, you think about, okay, on Olive Street in my small town, which is taking government action as a local community, Olive Street has a couple of homeless guys, Tom and Steve. They're the only homeless people in this small community because we're dealing with shit on that small of a level. Olive Street,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now we're going to solve this problem, and we're going to solve it by breaking it into every single teeny little component of homelessness that you can think of, and then having some like wiki kind of thing that allows people to uh, generate uh, and execute and figure out plans that are criticized. So it's like, well, how about we do this? Well, there's a public sort of adjudication process. Well, did you consider impacts to rights? Did you consider this? Blah, blah, blah. And there's somebody who's a fully qualified, certified, quadruple licensed bullshit caller. I feel qualified to do that myself. If I'm listening to this public policy argument, I can be fair. I'm not necessarily going to always side with the libertarian thing or anything like that. I will say, okay, well, here are your rights impacts, and here are your predicted utilitarian impacts. And you see they do, in fact, conflict. The predicted utilitarian impacts suggest that if you were to measure purely on impacts, that you should side with the utilitarian position. Here's the rights position. It suggests otherwise, and here's why. You guys know my position on it. But I can give you an objective assessment of the shit without advocating my own position, right? We need that guy. in the room, like in the wiki,
Mm-hmm.
flowing around, and everything's got to be. It's got to be all the issues ought to be debated out in full, with with rendered decisions, like by
With
official.
all the professionals as well, with all the people who have specialized knowledge on each aspect of the idea or the policy itself
Well,
as
see,
well.
I mean, I think that's part of the contention level argumentation. So it's like all that stuff. Those experts deserve and ought to be listened to in accordance with the accuracy of their information at the contention level. What I'm saying is, what's necessary and has to happen is for there to be a language of judging things, like there is in debate, that regular people use talking about public policy. So that when somebody says, we are too great a nation to see hundreds of thousands of hardworking Americans, meow, 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 everyone goes, okay, so what's the claim here that we're too? I don't even understand what I can't distinguish between your claim, your I don't hear an impact. I can't distinguish between your claim and your warrant. It sounds like complete fucking bullshit to me.
Is it legal?
We need a population who has become fluent in the language that one has to have in order to actually
Yeah,
meaningfully respond to things.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I don't know.
Well, I mean, like going a bit off on a tangent, but the way public policy is now and politics in general is, well, the system in which you get elected so that you can actually put in place a lot of policies, you have to pretty much go down these non-optimal routes for stating your policies, like the way Hillary Clinton and things like
I
that, like the way
I
they have to make their
I
points
disagree.
to generalize and
I
stupid like that because the system self-sustains itself, meaning that you have to do that, otherwise you lose the votes and therefore you don't get elected. So we need to mess with the system itself to optimize it, not anything else. We have to find the leverage points in which to make a change to which the system self-sustains itself.
okay.
I don't know if you.
I agree with you completely. And here's the leverage point I suggest is this one to start at. The leverage point is meta-analysis of the words you're saying. If you're a politician, like I want to run for president still, and um, I, I, I don't plan on bullshitting, right? And I plan to use, I plan to use what Trump has successfully used, which is this sort of like, just fuck these people kind of attitude, right? But in Trump, it appeals to a lot of different people. All of them are idiots. I mean, the people who support Trump and aren't idiots support him despite that shit from him, right? Not because it represents some quality of wisdom or something. But there is a certain appeal and I think satisfying sense of finality to that kind of attitude, right? However, if it's not mitigated by genuine awareness and actual intelligence and actually caring about people and actually having morals, then it's worthless.
Mhm.
So, what I think I potentially have the ability to do as a candidate, and it's something that needs to be done, is
Huh?
not play the game and say instead, here are my policies, and but more importantly, I'll be quick about the policies. I'll answer any of your questions, whatever you want. I don't care. But the most important thing I want to talk about is let's talk about these words that I'm saying and these words that they're saying. Because they're telling you a
Yeah,
bunch of lies, and I want to explain to you exactly why. I want all you yell at me and challenge me all you want. I want all of you to question the shit out of me. You know how they avoid those questions? I want to answer them all. Answer them. Ask me. You should be asking them
yeah,
too. Why aren't they answering them?
but that strategy, obviously, if you were suddenly in a position where you were trying to win in the election cycle, you probably wouldn't get elected because there's a reason why they don't do that.
The
And
first
so
time.
how do you make that? How do you make it so that people do that and they get voted for doing that? Well, you either have to change culture, you
I
have to
won't.
have a regular party that enforces somebody to start for people to have to do basically a debating style, or you have to be an outsider and you have to come up with.
You have to be an outsider,
Uh,
and you have to somehow generate sufficient discursive splash to get enough people's attention. If I could do that, I will win every single slap fight, scrap, punch fight, stab fight.
If
I
that
will win them all.
There was an example. What was? I don't know if I should bring it up, but I was reading. So all of my thoughts here come from this thing that I read from mentioning why politics is the way it is and how it's completely non-optimal for actually getting to the best public policies and all that. And it says this is why it's shit because of, and you have to be shit because of this. And then it referenced an island, I think. I won't bother. But it basically said that the only way to change the system is to they showed you a diagram of how politicians get elected, and that's the thing that keeps the cycle going. Is the way you get elected, basically. You have to change that. You have to change. You have to find a leverage point on the cycle to change how one gets elected, basically.
Well, and this is why I've always said from the beginning when I first decided I was going to run for president, I said, I'm not going to win the first time. One nice thing about the world that we exist in is the system is not only open, it's dynamic, and it's much more dynamic than people think. In other words, badnesses that were commonplace and normalized 10, 15 years ago are unthinkable now, right? Nobody seriously argues that marijuana users are criminal threats to society and that marijuana makes you rob banks and shit. They used to tell us that kind of shit when we were kids, right? If somebody tried to say that shit, some cop came and tried to say that shit, they'd be called out for it, for sure. Because it's a dynamic system, and the rules have changed. Now, with each of those rules, as they change, it's not just something that applies to that moment in the system and that particular aspect and it's fairly minor, blah, blah, blah. It changes the leverage points, too. So now, you can leverage that. And so, the thing is, I don't know exactly, it's impossible to say how exactly it plays out, right? But the key thing is, keep talking. Just give me enough chances to yell at somebody. Give me enough chances to explain why they're wrong. Give me enough chances to get my fucking mad out at people in the population at large.
I see what you mean. You're trying to make more of a cultural change, or you're trying to embarrass the other parties. But that's just one of the literally like a million ways you could do that. But the best way is to analyze how it's self-sustaining itself and then change the leverage.
The best way of all, though, is I got a gut feeling about this. Let's just roll and see how it plays out.
Yeah, current. Yeah.
That's my favorite way of going about it because that doesn't require any planning, you see.
Yeah.
I get tired of TI after I realize it's going to actually get into the details of how difficult this is going to be. That's my least favorite TI ever. I hate that TI. I do not want to hear about how my brilliant, fun plan is actually going to be really difficult.
Well, it's just that, it's an awesome plan. It's just, there's a reason why no one has done that plan before, because it's quite an obvious one.
Yet.
That doesn't work in the sentence.
Yeah, it does.
It doesn't.
Explains why nobody has done it. Blah, 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 blah.
No, because I said, why do you think no one has done that?
No, he said it explains why no one has done that.
The guy did do it, I think. There was a guy with like a welly on his head or something.
He did what, though? He didn't become president.
I don't know. I don't know enough about your political system.
Well, we've never had anybody but another freaking one of those presidents. We have had successfully actual outsiders win other offices, but in my opinion, they've all failed in some key area. Like Jesse Ventura was a libertarian who actually won the governorship of Minnesota, I think it was. But the thing is, he was kind of like a Rob Ford kind of character, you know? You know about Rob Ford, the mayor of that town in Canada? I think it's Toronto or something.
I might do actually. Yeah, maybe.
He got caught smoking crack. They had videos of him smoking crack with some gang members, right? He's mayor of Toronto. He's this old, fat, alcoholic white guy. He's dead now, but and his response was, listen, the problem is, and I don't have a crack problem. I was just drunk. Sometimes you do stuff like that when you're drunk. That was his response to the crack video. Okay? That guy was a character, let me tell you. He had no shame. And there's a certain quality of that guy and Jesse Ventura, right? But I actually think, I know this sounds fucking ridiculous, but I actually think I have a fairly good, like, the hand I'm holding is pretty good. Like, I understand at least why it's always failed before. And I'll understand if it fails the first time I try now, how to tweak it to make it fail less. And I understand that most of all, I just got to say more shit. I just got to keep getting up to the plate as many times as possible. Swing the bat as many times as possible.
I don't know. I've got my own idea though. I think so. Say you got together mathematicians, economists from all the best universities in the world, and you actually analysed the whole system in which your country depends on and its relations to other countries and all that. And then they actually, with these thousands of professionals, came up with different ideas. They debated all their ideas, and then they finally came up with a very vague master plan of what they would do if they were elected into government. That would crush the other sides immediately if that occurred. And that might be the catalyst to actually changing the system in which the US and other westernized countries use it.
Well, you know, they have a model penal code. The model penal code is basically what you're talking about, except it's a narrower field of people involved in making it, probably a lot more legal professionals. But it's a good penal code, and it's logically consistent penal code, and it is presented as a model that governments ought to model their own sets of laws after. Sometimes we reference it in debate. But the thing is, it wasn't presented. This is why framing is so important, right? It's not presented as what you just presented to me. It is a huge difference to say, here's how the country should move forward. But there are think tanks, right? Like, and the problem is, you can't get a large number of people to agree on anything, even a vague master plan.
I mean, let me just interject. I mean, what I'm saying is, I think possible, but like the amount of more work you'd have to do, and this is why I think you need thousands of people doing thousands of discussions all year round, is because you've got to go back into, you've got to analyze the whole system and how everything works, and it would be like an exponential amount of work to do that, try and change everything.
I mean, here's the thing. I feel like I have a very clear understanding of a very specific policy prescription for the country that is better than any group could ever come up with. I'm an individual-focused person. I don't think groups do good work. I think groups do shoddy, compromise-filled work. And the reason that it won't ever work, this is the problem with politics in the status quo, is the competing interest aspect of the political environment makes it such that compromise is necessary. But the nature of what's being done, namely legislation that renders individual human beings either fully viable or non viable according to its metaphysical designation of you as a criminal and its physical incarceration of you, because we're dealing with that kind of stuff, and because we're dealing with rights violations in general. Like taxation is a mushy area. I'm not saying we should get rid of all taxes, but I'm saying people don't really think much about taxation and why and how, and they don't get any further than, well, the government needs taxes to provide services. But that's not an analysis of taxation at all. We need to think of it in terms of, we go back to the beginning and say, remember, first and foremost, this is a citizen democracy. We are the government, and we hope we are serving our own interests. Mm-hmm. We are not serving anyone's interests if we are understanding the government as this thing that imposes stuff on us, this thing that punishes us for not harmful actions. It's like if I get a ticket for speeding or something, we all understand that we need to police the roads. But remember,
let me just interject again, because I think I heard you talk about this before. And what I see is the fundamental problem with this, utilitarian, there'll be less deaths, but there'll be more people in prison type problem, is you haven't defined an optimal equation of what you want to achieve, because you haven't worked out in your equation which one's better. You haven't worked out which one's better, because you don't know if 50 people dying is equal to or better than 100 people in prison. You can't say that because you haven't defined that.
Okay, but look, you brought my attention to that is a problem with that utilitarian argument that I was making. And the problem is, though, it's a framing problem. It's the argument I need to be making is this. As a citizen of these United States, do you choose to voluntarily pay a $100 fine because you know you were engaged in some reckless behavior? Remember, we're talking about what we as citizens choose for ourselves. Do we choose this for ourselves? And if not, if we do choose safe roads, if that's the outcome we choose, why are we relieving government of the burden to achieve that outcome in ways that don't take $100 from me? Because I'm not choosing this, but this is my government. This is my citizen democracy. I'm a citizen here. We pay taxes so that I can be assisted by the community with that tax money, not so that I can be seen as a revenue source. You're not different from me. We are choosing to act in commune for the common good. So why should you, representatives of me, be relieved of the burden to achieve the good outcome without making me pay a pound of flesh to get that accomplished? Is there no other way that you can? Oh. Who has the burden here? You're saying I have the burden to show that this is actually going to be better than that. No, my position is the government has the burden to achieve the outcome without violating people's rights. If they're too lazy or stupid to come up with a good way to do it, then somebody else needs to be in there. When we frame it properly, then I say, Congress, this is a great idea. I love this outcome you're going for here. You need to take this part out because you know what it's going to result in actually is the cops have yet another reason to shoot some black man in the face. It's no other good than that. So we're going to put that part out of there and send it back to me or I'm going to veto the fucking thing.
Well, it was framing. Yeah.
They have the burden.
Yeah. So I see
there's no plan. You can't plan your way through this INTP. You got to roll your way through it. It's got to be tactical. You got to respond in the moment to every individual situation. You got to acknowledge that some compromise is going to be necessary, but frame it such that you never compromise on the axiomatic principles that actually constrain and limit government. The Constitution of the United States is supposed to be a document that defines, constrains, limits the federal government. And when we ignore those constraints and pretend like we can interpret them away, then we end up with catastrophically shitty outcomes like we have now.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, like, I don't want to work in the system. I want to come up with a new system to make the whole thing better. And like,
Okay,
I think you said that.
but the current system is going to be ongoing, running regardless.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you got
So
to put sticks into it. That's what I want to do. I want to get elected and then go. Now let's see it run. Now let's see it run. Because I've got all
yeah,
kinds of sticks, and your machinery is wide open here. And I want to see that fucking thing crash to the ground. Fuck
yeah,
yeah.
that's one of. It, I can't really say it because like what I'm thinking of is way out there, and I don't. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. You mean your way is actually something where you could actually interact with the machine by sticking. So I see what you're saying, but
I think there's a temptation that's risky to think that we could actually plan it. The whole
yeah,
my point is make it more modular, more localized, so that anything that's planned is planned in a little circle, little teeny small circle, and it has competing circles trying to accomplish the same outcome. Let those different little apps of policy behaviors compete against each other for supremacy on a very small pond, and keep all the ponds very small, so that no centralized source of power really is in control of shit.
I don't know if that. I don't know if it's. I've got like this NI thing going on right now, but I don't think that's right. I don't think that actually work, and I don't think it's as good as another. I don't think it would be the best solution. I but I can't. Then again, I can't agree with you. Is what I'm saying. Can't
Okay.
fully agree.
Well, I mean, the thing is, for me, local is the answer to, but surely we need some government, don't we, Eric? Of course we do. And I understand that certain things must be federalized. But I've always said, I think the government should be structured like this: the local government has the most say about what happens in terms of crime and shit like that. And the next level of government polices that lower level of government rather than the people directly. So it's always your local friends and neighbors who are policing you. And the other levels of government police the levels of government.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds good. I'm not saying like that's a good idea. Like that sounds really good, but obviously I can't agree with you as it being the best solution.
That's fine. It's already done all the work it's going to do anyway, which is you've heard the idea, and whoever watches this video will hear the idea, and maybe some people will go, I don't like that idea, but give me another idea. And maybe their idea is better, and that's fine too. You know, I don't care. I'm not attached to ownership of anything. I don't feel like it's my idea exactly. It's just sort of the idea that I said. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll probably comment on it later on.
Word. Okay, this is a good stopping point. Eric's big critic Barry, thank you so much for having this one-on-one chat with me. I never put up the announcement of this meeting because I was about to do it when we were in the middle of talking. And I was like, no, I don't. I'm enjoying the conversation. This is a good conversation. You're a really fun person to talk to. It reminds me of talking with Zachary.